"Did you happen to see a red-haired girl run past here?" The question sliced through the rainy night as three men in black suits surrounded a dented sedan on a deserted road near Maple Ridge. Inside sat Elijah Carter, a 39-year-old black entrepreneur whose tech startup had just collapsed, now returning home from yet another failed job interview. Calmly resting both hands on the steering wheel, Elijah replied, "Just changing a flat tire, sir. Haven't seen anyone." The tallest man scanned the car interior with a sharp eye before nodding and walking away. As their tail lights disappeared into the mist, a muffled voice emerged from the trunk. "Are they gone?" Elijah opened it to reveal a young woman with wild red hair, her designer sneakers caked in mud and hoodie soaked through. Her name was Riley Monroe, a tech millionaire worth over $100 million, now a fugitive hiding from the very empire her family built. What Elijah didn't know yet was that picking her up would pull him into a conspiracy far beyond corporate sabotage, one that could shake the foundations of power, expose decades of corruption, and force him to choose between safety and justice. Elijah Carter once stood on the cusp of redefining the future of artificial intelligence. As the founder and CEO of a promising AI startup in Seattle, he had spent 7 grueling years building his company from scratch, coding through sleepless nights, pitching to skeptical investors, and mentoring a diverse team that reflected his belief in inclusive innovation. But everything unraveled the moment his largest investor abruptly pulled out, just days before the final round of funding. It wasn't the business model, the technology, or the numbers that scared them off. It was the realization that the visionary behind it all was a black man. Within weeks, the bank foreclosed on his office space, and his startup became another statistic in a system stacked against people who looked like him. With nothing left but a beat-up car and the fading remnants of a dream, Elijah was driving home from yet another job rejection when fate placed someone unexpected in his path. Riley Monroe, 28, was the only daughter of Gregory Monroe, a powerful venture capitalist whose reputation was built on ruthless takeovers and strategic sabotage, especially targeting startups founded by black and brown entrepreneurs. Born into wealth, Riley had spent most of her life detached from her father's business dealings, content with her own success in building wellness tech apps. But that illusion shattered when she stumbled across an encrypted folder on her father's server, a hidden trove of internal documents exposing a network of financial crimes, including international money laundering, investment fraud, and a secret government contract involving biometric surveillance on US citizens without consent. Among the documents was a name that jolted her: Elijah Carter. The folder detailed how Gregory's firm covertly orchestrated a digital smear campaign against Elijah's company, planting false reviews, manipulating investor confidence, and triggering legal loopholes that ensured his failure. Horrified by the scope of her father's corruption and determined to stop the very machine she had unknowingly benefited from, Riley copied the files onto a secure drive and fled. Her father's private security team had been hunting her ever since. That's when she ended up hiding in Elijah's trunk. Despite the absurdity of their meeting, Riley knew one thing: she couldn't go to the press, the authorities, or even her old allies in Silicon Valley. Most of them were entangled with her father in one way or another. Elijah, on the other hand, had every reason not to trust her, but also every reason to care about what the truth could bring. Their connection wasn't based on shared backgrounds or beliefs, but on mutual betrayal by a system that had failed them in different ways. Holding that drive felt like holding a ticking bomb, and the only person she could trust to help her decide what to do with it was the man her father had tried to destroy. The moment Elijah received a notification on his phone that his license plate had been flagged as a stolen vehicle, reality sank in. They were no longer just two strangers crossing paths in the night, but fugitives in a national manhunt. Every camera, toll booth, and patrol car was potentially watching them. Riley knew her father's reach extended beyond legal means. He didn't need warrants or procedures. All it took was money, and she'd vanish from every database forever. With little time and fewer options, Elijah veered off the highway and followed Riley's whispered directions into the backwoods of northern Washington. There, hidden beneath a tangle of moss-covered branches and unmarked dirt paths, stood a forgotten family asset, a small, decaying cabin Gregory Monroe had purchased decades ago to hide assets off record. Inside, among rotting floorboards and the smell of damp wood, they found momentary shelter. But peace was fleeting. As Elijah connected Riley's encrypted hard drive to his old laptop, the screen illuminated documents far more dangerous than either of them had anticipated. Among the files detailing fraud, tax evasion, and political bribes was a chilling dossier labeled Project Halo. The documents outlined a global data mining operation disguised as a wellness technology initiative, designed to harvest private user data, including biometric and emotional response tracking, for sale to government agencies and political campaigns. It wasn't just about corporate greed. It was about control, manipulation, and erasing any semblance of personal freedom. Elijah was stunned. The very tech industry he once believed in had become the weapon of those in power. Just as he began to process the implications, Riley, pale and visibly shaken, confessed a deeper truth. The hard drive wasn't the only reason she was running. She was pregnant, with the child of her former fiancé, a man named Caleb Rowe, who had once been Gregory's fiercest rival in the venture capital world. Caleb had mysteriously disappeared last year after refusing to sell his clean energy company to Monroe Capital. Riley suspected her father's hand in his vanishing. When she discovered she was pregnant, she realized that Gregory would stop at nothing, not just to suppress the truth, but to erase any bloodline tied to his enemies. That's when she knew she had to run, not only to expose her father, but to protect the life growing inside her. Elijah was silent for a long moment, absorbing everything: the child, the data, the stakes. He had spent months living in the shadows of his failure, convinced the world had moved on without him. Now, sitting in a crumbling cabin with a fugitive tech heiress and a digital bomb that could tear down a billion-dollar empire, he found himself at a crossroads. He could keep driving, keep hiding, keep pretending that survival was enough. Or he could rise, not for revenge, but for justice. For every startup buried under systemic discrimination. For the millions unknowingly surrendering their privacy. For a child not yet born whose future was already being decided by corrupt hands. Elijah looked at Riley, and in that moment, the man the system had discarded found something far more powerful than success: purpose. In a moment of desperation and clarity, Elijah made a single call. To Nina Tran, a sharp, principled Vietnamese-American attorney based in Tacoma, who had once fought tirelessly to defend his company before it collapsed. He hadn't spoken to her in over a year, not since the lawsuits dried up and the press lost interest in his downfall. But Nina answered on the first ring, and after a brief, tense exchange, she agreed to meet. When she arrived at the cabin the next morning, jeans rolled at the ankle and a legal pad in hand, she listened to their story without interruption. Then, with a sigh, she said the words they didn't know they needed to hear. "Let's burn this thing down legally." With Nina on board, the trio set to work, creating a secure communication plan and devising a legal strategy that could survive the courtroom, or the court of public opinion if needed. For Riley, the shift was disorienting. Raised in penthouses and flown by private jet to schools and board meetings, she was now eating canned beans by lantern light and sleeping on a cot in the woods. She had never had to ask for help before, never had to rely on the patience of others or the kindness of strangers. And yet here she was, taking instructions from a disbarred entrepreneur, being protected by a woman who had once sued her father's firm, and learning that power was not just something inherited, but something built through trust, resilience, and hard choices. Every night, she helped Elijah catalog the contents of the hard drive. The documents were more than incriminating, they were devastating. But none hit harder than one particular file, one that Elijah opened by accident while scanning a batch of contracts. It was a cybersecurity memo labeled Initiative Echo Black. As he clicked through the attachments, his stomach dropped. There, in plain text, was a signed authorization from Gregory Monroe approving a targeted disinformation campaign and coordinated cyber attack on Carter Logic, Elijah's former company. The plan had included hiring an anonymous hacker syndicate to breach internal systems, leak false data, and create enough public doubt to push investors away. Elijah's downfall hadn't been market forces or bad timing. It had been engineered. Every sleepless night, every late fee, every layoff, every moment he'd questioned his own worth, all orchestrated by the father of the woman now sitting beside him. Riley, reading over his shoulder, covered her mouth, her face pale with horror. "I didn't know," she whispered. Elijah didn't speak for a while, the glow of the laptop flickering across his clenched jaw. It would have been easy to hate her in that moment, to walk away, to let bitterness take root. But instead he closed the screen, stood up and said, "Then we make it right." That night marked a quiet turning point, not just in their plan, but in their bond. Elijah was no longer driven by what he'd lost, but by what he could expose. Riley was no longer just running from her father. She was running towards something too. Accountability, redemption, and the possibility that even someone born into privilege could choose a different legacy. The plan was bold, borderline reckless, and had only one shot at working. With Nina's legal expertise, Riley's insider knowledge, and Elijah's unflinching determination, they orchestrated a public takedown that would unfold at the West Coast Tech Forum, one of the most influential technology conferences in the country. Riley Monroe was scheduled to deliver the keynote address on the future of ethical innovation, and the irony was not lost on any of them. The team infiltrated the audiovisual systems 2 days in advance, thanks to a backdoor Nina's tech contact quietly inserted into the conference's network. The night before the event, Riley recorded a message in one take, her voice steady but her eyes heavy with the weight of truth. On the day of the speech, the ballroom was packed with venture capitalists, startup founders, and journalists from every major outlet. Gregory walked on stage to thunderous applause, flanked by banners touting data, transparency, and trust. He adjusted his suit, smiled at the cameras, and began his carefully rehearsed speech. But midway through his second slide, the lights dimmed. The LED walls behind him flickered, then lit up with something entirely unplanned. A stream of emails showing investor manipulation, spreadsheets detailing under-the-table payouts, and legal memos implicating Monroe Capital in targeted attacks on minority-owned startups. Gasps echoed across the room. Riley's pre-recorded video took over the screen. She introduced herself not as Riley Monroe's daughter, but as a whistleblower who had uncovered a coordinated systemic campaign to destroy competition, suppress innovation, and silence minority voices in tech. She didn't flinch when she revealed that she was carrying the child of Caleb Rowe, the man her father had professionally ruined and possibly had disappeared. "I won't raise this child under a name built on fear and corruption," she said, her voice resolute. "This ends now." As murmurs swept through the room, another figure emerged from the side of the stage. Elijah, dressed in a simple charcoal suit, stepped forward with a calmness that silenced even the most skeptical attendees. Gregory, now visibly shaken, locked eyes with him. "You remember me," Elijah said evenly. "You didn't just sabotage my company, you tried to erase everything I stood for, but I'm still here." Gregory tried to protest, waving at the technicians to cut the feed, but Nina had locked the system. The screens continued to display document after document, all admissible in court, all traceable to Monroe's own signature. A live ticker showed Monroe Capital's stock plummeting in real time. Reporters began to stand, shouting questions. "Mr. Monroe, do you deny ordering these attacks? Is it true your firm targeted black-owned startups? Are you aware of the implications of Project Halo?" Security moved to escort Gregory off stage, but he froze, caught in the glare of hundreds of eyes and the undeniable truth unraveling behind him. This wasn't just a press ambush, it was a reckoning. Elijah didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence alone said everything. For the first time, the man who had once been dismissed as a failure stood not in shame, but in power. Power built not on wealth or influence, but on truth. And this time, the whole world was watching. In the weeks following the public takedown at the tech conference, federal agents moved swiftly. Riley Monroe was arrested on charges including financial fraud, antitrust violations, obstruction of justice, and large-scale breaches of consumer privacy. The evidence presented by Riley, Elijah, and Nina was airtight. Cross-referenced files, internal memos, signed directives, and transactional trails that painted a damning portrait of systematic abuse and corruption. His arrest sparked a wave of investigations across multiple agencies, and his carefully constructed empire began to collapse. While the media circled around Gregory's fall from grace, Elijah quietly began rebuilding, not a company, but a movement. The federal government issued a settlement to compensate affected businesses, and Elijah used his portion to lay the foundation for something new. Nova Fund, a venture capital incubator designed specifically for startups led by underrepresented founders, Black, Latino, Indigenous, LGBTQ+, and women who had long been denied a seat at the table. But Elijah didn't do it alone. Riley, now disinherited from her father's fortune, but empowered by the truth she helped expose, dedicated the remaining assets she had access to in building Nova Fund's first portfolio. Nina became the head of the fund's legal division, helping startups navigate the complex terrain that once crushed Elijah. The three of them, along with former founders who had also suffered under Monroe Capital's predatory practices, built a model not just for investment, but for accountability and equity. The fund wasn't about chasing unicorns, it was about making sure the next Elijah Carter didn't get erased before he had a chance to launch. Months later, Riley gave birth to a healthy baby girl named Lila, and in that hospital room, surrounded by people who had become family through fire, she made a vow to raise her daughter in a world where integrity mattered more than power, and where wealth wasn't built on the backs of others. She turned down press interviews and corporate book deals, instead choosing to work quietly behind the scenes, mentoring female founders and advocating for ethical innovation. Meanwhile, Elijah, who once doubted he'd ever return to the tech world, found himself not only back in it, but reshaping it. He spoke at universities, mentored teenagers from low-income communities, and used his story as both a warning and a blueprint. Nova Fund expanded to 3 cities in its first year and helped launch over a dozen startups, all of which prioritized community, transparency, and purpose over valuation hype. At the fund's 1-year anniversary gala, Elijah stood before a crowd of entrepreneurs, investors, and activists, many of whom had once been considered unfundable, and raised a glass not to profits, but to perseverance. "This," he said, "is what rebuilding looks like. Not just for a business, but for a broken system." Across the ballroom, Riley watched with quiet pride, holding Lila in her arms, knowing that while the road to redemption had been painful and public, it had also been necessary. Gregory Monroe had tried to bury the truth, but from the wreckage, something far more powerful had been born. A network of leaders who didn't just want to succeed. They wanted to change what success meant for everyone. 3 years later, the rooftop of Nova Fund's headquarters buzzed with quiet excitement as a new cohort of young entrepreneurs prepared to pitch their ideas in the fund's first national showcase. Elijah Carter stood near the edge, his eyes scanning the skyline of a city he once thought would forget him. He wore no tie, just a clean white shirt and a calm confidence that came from building something that mattered. Behind him, Riley approached, carrying her toddler daughter Lila, whose bright eyes and messy curls mirrored her mother's defiance and her father's legacy. Riley smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You pulled me out of a trunk that night," she said softly. "Now look at you, lifting an entire generation." Elijah chuckled, eyes still on the horizon, and simply replied, "We pulled each other out." The moment was quiet, but it echoed louder than any headline that had once defined their fall and rise. Together, they had helped take down a corrupt empire and, more importantly, helped build a new blueprint for what justice could look like. Nova Fund had now launched over 30 startups and mentored dozens more, each one backed not by pedigree, but by potential. And yet, the true impact wasn't measured in funding rounds or press coverage. It was in the people who no longer felt invisible, no longer felt like long shots, no longer had to ask permission to dream. Sometimes the greatest revolutions don't begin with grand speeches or protests. They begin with small human moments, a flat tire on a rainy road, a stranger offering a ride, a decision to trust someone you have every reason not to. That night in the woods, Elijah had every reason to keep driving, to protect what little was left of his life. But instead he stopped. And that simple act of kindness became the spark that ignited a cascade of change neither of them could have imagined. The collapse of Gregory Monroe's empire wasn't the ending. It was the clearing of the ground for something new, something just. Justice, real justice, is not just about exposing the corrupt or punishing the powerful. It's about rebuilding the very systems that allowed injustice to thrive in the first place. It's about choosing hope when cynicism feels safer and standing up for what's right even when you're outnumbered, underestimated, or afraid. Most of all, it's about remembering that one person, one action, can ripple outward in ways we may never fully see. Elijah didn't just rebuild his career. He helped reimagine what success could mean for those who had long been shut out. And Riley, once a woman born into privilege, chose to spend her inheritance investing in those no one else would bet on. Together, they proved that redemption isn't given, it's built. And sometimes, the most broken people build the strongest foundations. What started as a ride in the dark became a movement that would light the way for others. Because in the end, the most meaningful victories don't come from destroying our enemies. They come from building a world where their weapons, greed, exclusion, silence, no longer have power. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of resilience, redemption, and the power of unlikely alliances. Elijah and Riley's story reminds us that no matter how broken the system seems, change is always possible when we choose courage over comfort and action over silence. From a chance encounter on a rainy road to the fall of a corrupt empire, their story proves that sometimes the people the world underestimates the most are the ones who rise to transform it. At X Daily Stories, we believe in telling powerful, emotional, and thought-provoking stories that reflect the real struggles and triumphs of everyday people. Our mission is to inspire, challenge, and remind you that even the darkest nights can give way to the brightest dawns. If this story moved you, made you think, or gave you hope, don't forget to like, comment, and most importantly, subscribe to X Daily Stories. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a new story that could change the way you see the world. Let's build a community of changemakers, one story at a time. Because the right story at the right time can spark a revolution. We'll see you in the next one.